We got a great day on Endless Hustle as I'm joined by a man who's been part of so many projects that have been a part of my life for so many years, John C. McGinley. I mean, I've seen Wall Street 85 times. You're now part of the final season of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I feel like your career is about inserting yourself into iconic projects like Scrubs and so many others, just so people know who you are. I think that's the plan. What do you say?
I like that plan. I mean, if you don't know me by now, it may not work out. Between Platoon and Wall Street and Any Given Sunday and Office Space and The Rock and Scrubs, that landscape's pretty rich with John McGinley plate appearances.
Let me get the Brooklyn Nine-Nine stuff out of the way. That's what we got to plug. So let's just run through it. You're joining the final season of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It has now become an iconic show. The fact that it got canceled and then the fans brought it back and started that movement just tells you how beloved it is. How cool is it to be joining?
You know what? Now that you say it like that, Scrubs was canceled season 8, and it was brought back season 9. I don't think the fans did it. I think that was more of an economic thing for Disney and ABC. But it's interesting. I've been on 2 shows that were canceled after long runs. You know, it's great when you step into something. I mean, this has all sorts of weird components to it. One of which is we shot this thing starting in February when the country and the world was shoulder deep in COVID. And so we were over in Burbank, in Studio City, and the first hour and a half of your day were COVID protocols, from the swab to spitting. And so if your call time was 6, you weren't on the set till practically 8, and none of that was hair and makeup. It was all go stand in that line and then get your results and then go over in that line. And it wasn't that big a deal. I mean, it was nice to be employed during a global pandemic, but it was a different way to start the day, I'll tell you that. And then you wind up on the sound stage, and the sound stage over at CBS Radford was divided up into zones. And so when the actors were on set, different department heads, grips and people who pull cables, and different departments weren't allowed on the set. They had to vacate the soundstage. And then when those people came back on to do the next setup, the people who were going to focus the lights, the people who were going to lay cable, the guy who was going to move the couch, the actors had to vacate the set. And so it led to a greatly reduced call sheet. So in other words, whereas normally on a sitcom, you're doing 11 pages a day, we were doing 5, which doesn't sound very ambitious, but given that a huge chunk of your morning was gone, and then the pace of the day was at a snail's pace, because there were different COVID hall proctors on the set who were making sure in a good spirit of things that you were adhering to this zone landscape. And it was very different. I mean, look, nothing's different between action and cut. You still got to bring it. But leading up to and in between was very different. I've 0 complaints, given 600,000 people have perished, but it was very different. And that ensemble was so tight and so clicked in. It's not like people were exploring, how to get from A to B anymore. They knew their cadence, they knew their rhythms, and I can fit into that stuff in a millisecond.
Yeah, and you know what's great is because that show's so beloved and has I don't even have to sit here and bullshit with you about what's your role. People are going to watch his show. John C. McGinley's joining it. It's going to be a great final season. Make sure to watch it. I don't have to plug Brooklyn Nine-Nine much. People are coming to watch his final season.
Yeah, that ensemble is watertight. It reminded me of Scrubs in as much as those are all from Andre to Andy that's a really tight group of very, very skilled actors. And when you get with a group like that, which you don't always get on sets, a lot of times there's a couple of pretenders or phonies in every ensemble, and the writers have to write around that person or that group. But there was no fat on the bone of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And those writers, their pedigree is insane, just like on Scrubs. And so that means you don't have to work as hard, and the camera doesn't suffer you working as hard. So, athletes always talk about a flow state, and actors, if they're lucky, can then get into a flow state. And what that looks like is people not even trying. And that's what that ensemble is. They're in a flow state.
I want to jump into Wall Street. So I am a former financial advisor, a reformed addict, not an addict, drug addict, an addict of being a financial advisor, which is its own drug. But I was a financial advisor for a decade. Wall Street was the Bible of our lives. You get to work with Charlie Sheen at the apex. Michael Douglas creates Gordon Gekko, the iconic 80s character of all 80s characters. Oliver Stone at his apex. Walk me through what that batshit set must have been like in that era.
Well, it's even better than that because I was doing a hit play. Were you in New York at the time?
No, I'm from Philly originally.
Well, I was right up on Lafayette Street at the Public, the New York Shakespeare Festival, a year into a 2-year run of talk radio, which Oliver would eventually shoot as a film. And so I was doing talk radio. An off-Broadway schedule is 8 shows a week. So you do 6 nights and 2 matinees. And so I got Wall Street because I had just spent 5 months of my life with Oliver and Charlie in the Philippines doing Platoon. And cut to a year later, I'm doing this smash hit play off Broadway, talk radio. And so we told that to Oliver going in, and we were way down in the southern tip of Manhattan by the Woolworth building, which is almost a straight shot up the Lafayette Street. And the only reason that's germane to the story is that I had to be at talk radio every night at half hour. The actors have to be at the theater a half hour before curtain. And so I was to be there every night at 7:30 with the curtain, obviously at 8 o'clock. And Oliver kept pushing it, and Oliver didn't care about talk radio. And so we kept going over and over. And I had been raised on the Lou Gehrig, Wally Pipp philosophy of you don't ever take a game off, because Wally Pipp did. And then Lou Gehrig never sat down. And I had that with John Turturro when I was understudying and making up John in Danny in the Deep Blue Sea. And John just never took any performances off because he's the best, until he went to do a Madonna movie called Desperately Seeking Susan. And that's when I took over for him. And that's when a casting assistant came and saw me and cast me in Platoon. And so I was not going to take a night off and talk radio. And we kept going later and later down by the Woolworth building. And I'm going up to the first AD, which is the person who runs the set. I'm like, I got to go, because I got a Teamster waiting for me to drive me up Lafayette. I got to be there at half hour. And I like being there at half hour. I like to do a vocal warm up. I like to relax. I like to think about this 8-minute monologue in the first act of talk radio, where I come down the center of the stage, a pin spot hits me. It's an actor's dream. And I tell an 8-minute story about Eric Bogosian. And so I like to get present for that. When you get a pin spot on you, it's about a 400-seat theater. It's heaven, but you got to be present. And so we went later and later. And one night I got there at almost Places, so not even 5 minutes. I got there at Places. And then my understudy was in the wings waiting to go on. I told the stage manager, I said to him, I'm going on. And I did. And I went down to the center of the stage in the middle of the play to do this 8-minute monologue with a pin spot on me. And when you forget a line in theater, it's called going up. And I went up because I was thinking about Oliver screaming at Charlie and Charlie having a panic attack, and then Oliver screaming at me and me screaming at him. And I forgot what I was doing for those 8 minutes. And I've never gone up in my life. I just don't. And I went up in front of those 400 people, and I sat back down. Eric Bogosian, who's the biggest mensch on the planet, he came over afterwards and he's just like, dude, you got an understudy, don't do that. And the next night, Oliver kept us until after Places, and I didn't go on that night. And guess what? Everything was fine.
So was he that? He's obviously notorious for being so tough on his talent. You get to work with him on Platoon, which that shooting environment must have been some crazy shit. Then you're doing Wall Street. Is he as tough as everyone says he was?
Yes. Tougher.
Is that enjoyable for an actor? Does it make you better, or was it a tough experience?
It's nirvana when you can. Do you know what? You know, Kentucky horses who are thoroughbreds wear those blinders. And in the metaphor I'm about to use, if you can fit inside Oliver's creative vision, which is inside these blinders, if you can fit in here, it's nirvana. If you want to operate over here on his sets, you'll get crushed. And so when some actors, and I'm not going to tell you who, but when they show up on his set, I've done 6 with Oliver, and some actors show up and they want to operate outside his creative vision. And it's Oliver's movie. It's not creativity by collaboration and committee. It's Oliver's film. And that's good and bad, but that's what you signed up for. And so if you want to operate outside that creative field of vision, you will get crushed. It'll be soul crushing.
When you look around, you're making Wall Street. I'm a Michael Douglas fanatic. I've interviewed him many times, nicest dude on the planet. But when you're standing there and you see him doing this gecko thing, which ends up becoming iconic, obviously it's Sheen at his best. Do you guys know at that point what you're making? Do you know that this thing is going to be an instant classic? Like Platoon is probably easy to tell it's going to be a classic. But did you know?
No, opposite with Platoon. Because remember, when we came back, Cruise had they just released kind of a Reagan era, very jingoistic celebration of war machines with Top Gun. And we'd done the exact opposite. We had chronicled Oliver's experience in Southeast Asia as a infantryman, and it was largely a love story about loss and redemption. And we got home and Top Gun was the fucking hit. And so then strike 2, we find out Oliver's going to put it out at Christmas, and nothing says Christmas like Platoon. And I just figured we were fucked. And then somehow, some way, that thing caught fire. Wall Street didn't have as much of an uphill mountain to climb as Platoon, just because of Michael being a superstar at that time. And Charlie had gotten a lot of heat out of Platoon. And Oliver had already won for Midnight Express. And he'd written Scarface by then. And so that had a much richer pedigree. And so when Wall Street was a big hit, at least demographically, it wasn't as big a surprise. But no, on the set, you don't know squat. We did, Johnny Cusack and Paul Newman and I did a film about the making of the atomic bombs, named after the 2 bombs, Fat Man and Little Boy, about the journey that was happening in Los Alamos. And Milos Zygmunt shot it, who won an Academy Award for Close Encounters. Roland Joffe, who had just done The Killing Fields and The Mission, was the director. It had Academy Awards all over it. And it was a dog with fleas, to quote Michael. It couldn't find a single ass in the seats. And it was one of the best experiences I've ever had on a set. And it tanked. So you don't know squat on a set.
You then move into television. You do all these iconic movies. You'd mentioned, obviously, that you rattled them all off. Then you move into television.
I didn't rattle them all off. I rattled off 6.
Yeah, those are classics, by the way, like The Rock. And you're like, I love it, by the way. This is like my childhood. This is like my formative years of watching movies. Then you land into Scrubs, which ends up launching Zach into another stratosphere, Donald into another stratosphere. And that show, you're right at the beginning of prestige television. The Sopranos has now begun. You see The Wire. Could you feel at that point that Scrubs, something was happening and people were really responding to it?
No, because we were shooting, it wasn't like a live sitcom like the ones I was raised on, like Archie Bunker and these ones where it's a 4-camera setup and you're in and out. It was a single camera, like a movie, and we were there 16 hours a day, most days. And so nobody came up for air until about season 5. We were just grinding. We were doing 24 episodes a year, which is fantastic because you get paid per episode. And it was a great gig. And nobody knew squat until about season 5. And then once you start getting paid that season 5 money, you're pretty aware that something's going on.
Is that life-changing money? When you get to season 5 money, that's like the FU moment of an actor. Like you're like, I'm good, I'm settled for a bit.
If that season 5 money lasts another 5 seasons, which it did with Scrubs, and you're smart with your dough, that should be life-changing dough.
That's fascinating. And it's interesting to hear from actors. Here you are, you get to work on these iconic projects, but all these actors, and I feel like that's why I know the writing is incredible in TV right now, but it's got to be, you hit syndication, it's like, I'm good for a while.
Well, syndication's a little overrated, just because the union has been so spineless with these streaming services. But your game check, your episode check, season 5 through almost 9.5, that should, if you have a financial advisor, in this case, my brother and me, I'm very comfortable managing money. My whole family is. You should be pretty squared away.
So at that point, you've had success on TV and you're looking at Scrubs and you come up for air at season 5. Do you now understand how beloved the show is at that moment? Do you kind of look around and people are like, I fucking love this show?
Yeah, I go to Ireland every year with my brothers, and we used to with my father, and we play golf for a week and lie about how great we used to be. And in Ireland, the show, because of the tone, because it's so sarcastic and ironic and sardonic and glib, and those notes play in the Irish and the British sensibility. It was always a much bigger hit over there than it was here. And that around that 5th season, when it had started to rotate around the planet, I told my castmates when I get back, I said, if you guys are having any self-esteem issues, go to Dublin, because you're John, Paul, or Ringo, you're George, man. You're a star in Dublin. And that's where I got a real taste of being famous.
Everyone always talks about these revivals and these reunions. I know Scrubs is constantly, Zach and Donald are getting bombarded every 2 minutes. But is this something that is realistic? I mean, have you guys had conversations, or it's something you'd want to do? Or are you kind of like, you know what, I'm done with it. It's been like X number of years, I'm good.
I think if Billy Lawrence, who now is having a phenomenal run with Ted Lasso, and he said it's a 3-season show for him. And so that puts Billy, 2 years from now? I wouldn't be surprised if he revisited Scrubs. I mean, it's all on Billy. It's his sensibilities. It's his what's on the page. I don't know anybody in the ensemble who wouldn't join in on that. It's a great gig, and you can be proud of it. I mean, it'd be different if it was a sucky gig. Like I did Highlander #2 down in Buenos Aires, and it was the worst fucking movie I've ever been in. And Sean Connery, rest in peace, was very tricky. And the directors and the producers, it was just, they were pulling it out of their ass every day. There was nothing. And if you asked me to do another Highlander, I'd be like, no, because the first one sucked. I mean, I did the second one. And if you did a third, now they've done every iteration of on the planet. But Scrubs, my point is that Scrubs, if Billy puts it on the page, it's going to be really good. And he'll find that middle ground between something really funny and then something really tragic. And he can reconcile those two qualities somehow. And that's what you want to participate in.
You'd mentioned, obviously, he's now done Ted Lasso. What makes a dude like that so talented? Like, are they just able to spew that type of shit out of their head? Is it a team? Like, how does this all work to where some of these writers and creators become so prolific?
Billy's a unicorn. He's the Norman Lear of his generation. He's different than everybody else in that space. It's that simple.
Just the mind works different. It's just genius level thinking.
Yes. And everything's crunch time in TV. There's no time for anything. So if TV is ever even a C plus, it's a miracle. And if something is elevated from there, it's impossible. So when Ted Lasso is as good as it is, and when he was doing Cougar Town and they were crushing it, and when he was doing Scrubs or the Michael Fox show about City Hall, I mean, Billy's just great at this stuff. It's that simple. He's great at this stuff.
So do you attach to these people? You do 6 movies with Oliver. Your work, like, do you pretty much identify, all right, this guy or girl, they're brilliant. I've got to stay in their good graces and show up wherever, whenever?
Yeah, but it's reciprocal for them too, because I'm going to make their life easier. And everybody, I think human instinct dictates that you want to have me make your life easier, and I want to have you make my life easier. And on a set, I'm going to make your life really easy, because I'm going to elevate whatever you put on the page. I'm not going to kidnap it, but I'm going to elevate it and make you look even better than what you put on the page. So that's what you want.
You've gotten to work with the who's who. I mean, like, you're naming Sean Connery, Nick Cage. I mean, Douglas at his prime. Who were like the 1 or 2 that just different stratosphere, different level where you're like, this is GOAT shit. This is Michael Jordan, LeBron James level.
It's easy. Paul Newman on Fat Man and Little Boy, because I hero worshipped him, and then Paul turned out to be who you wanted Paul to be. In other words, he was with Johnny Cusack and I, who's my neighbor and pretty much my brother. We called him the big dog because he was the biggest dog in Durango, Mexico. And Paul was it. Paul was it. And then right up there, also in the first round draft pick, is Al Pacino. I worked with Al on Any Given Sunday, and then Al invited me to come do a revival of Glengarry Glen Ross on Broadway with Bobby Cannavale and David Harbour and Richard Schiff, and this murderer's row of actors that we did when Hurricane Sandy came. So what was that, 5 years ago now? And we did it in New York for a couple of months. We all agreed to do 100 performances, and every single one was standing room only. And it was the greatest experience of my life, largely because of Al.
I wanted to ask you about Any Given Sunday. So I had Dennis Quaid on the show recently. That's one of my
favorites.
Dude.
The best.
By the way, like the most talented dude on the planet. Like, it's one of those dudes where you're like, I fucking hate you because you're so damned. One human should not be able to play instruments and sing and like. What was that experience? That must have been just a blast to make that movie. You got LT, Jim Brown, Pacino. It's got to be crazy.
I got to coach. Oliver didn't have time, and he was going through some stuff. And so he asked me to work with LT, who, as a Giants fanatic, my grandfather played for the 1927 Giants. He was a 2-time All-American at University of Pennsylvania. So was my father. And so I was steeped in Giant football. I bleed Giant blue. And so when Oliver asked me to work with LT on that steam sauna scene where he has that great monologue, I got to work with LT on that. And the trade-off was that he explained a cover 2 to me on the floor of the then Orange Bowl. And so I get chills telling the story. And so it was, Any Given Sunday was one of the great gigs of all time, because Cameron was so great. She was like Barbara Stanwyck in that. She was so great. Al was unbelievable. Denny was fantastic. Jimmy Woods was great. Modine was great. That was just, talk about murder. Jamie Foxx was incredible. I mean, that ensemble's sick. I love that gig. I loved it. We were down in Miami for about 4 months, and then we played away games at then Cowboy Stadium in Irvine, Texas. And then we had reshoots somewhere, but that was great. I thought Cameron was really she was kind of the straw that stirred the drink on that one. I thought she was amazing.
by the way, with LT, Jim Brown ended up doing a ton of other acting, by the way. LT was really freaking good in that movie.
I agree.
And it's fascinating because I don't know why he doesn't show up and didn't really pursue more acting. It could have been the personal stuff, but he was really great in that.
I thought he was fantastic. I thought he had some of the most soulful things and most truthful things born out of pain and experience. And he was very vulnerable. And I thought he was stunning. He was on great behavior down in Miami. He and Jimmy Woods were just out playing golf every day when they weren't on the set. Jimmy was great in that movie. That argument he and Al have, it's just incredible. That scene they have together. Those are a couple stallions going at it. Al and Jimmy, come on.
When you see that happening on set, obviously it translates to camera, but can you feel it while you're watching it on set that there's magic happening?
Yes. And you hope the DP, the director of photography, you hope the cameras are in the right spot, and you hope sound is getting this. And obviously there's so many moving parts on the set, but you see two actors like that, two titans. And Jimmy can hold his own against anybody. And Al's not afraid. Al just go. Al will just, he's just fearless. And the camera picks all that up.
Speaking of it, you mentioned Newman and Pacino, two guys who are not big guys, by the way. And it just tells you about, they're not Chris Hemsworth. They're not 6'3" and Thor. They're on the shorter side, but their charisma and what they bring to the camera, is it prevalent in real life too? Obviously, you mentioned Paul Newman was just a great dude, but did it translate in real life the way it translates on camera, their charisma?
They're just two of the coolest cats ever born. And so that's all off camera. There's no histrionics. There's no crazy, eccentric behaviors. They're just cool daddies. They're just cool daddies.
Is it crazy to you to look back? I mean, we're having this like retrospective on your career, and this is just crazy shit we're talking about, right? Like you're like, I worked with Pacino. Like, do you ever kind of sit back and you're like, this was my life, like my life? Like, how crazy is that?
None of it's lost on me. None of it. I mean, just because I was banging around New York for so long, and playing third guy on the right in a Shakespeare play, and I was doing a soap out in Brooklyn for 3 years, doing Another World. I was extras in Alan Alda movies out in the Hamptons. My charge, my mandate was not to go back to being a waiter, which I did. And it was very lucrative, and I was a good waiter, but I didn't want to do it anymore. I wanted to be a storyteller, and so that was so I just at one point there I was doing 6 or 7 movies a year, because I just decided that if you were lucky enough to get a ticket on the movie train, you don't ever get off. And I didn't. I just said yes to everything. There's a lot of stinkers on my resume, but I don't care. I was on sets. Every day on a set is a day on a set. And I always tell actors that it's like practicing free throws. There's no way to practice free throws unless you put a ball in your hand and get, 15, 12 feet away from the rim, and start practicing. And you have to get in front of the lens. And if you don't get in front of the lens, nothing else counts, because anybody can memorize. I can memorize the phone book in a closet in the dark. It's not that hard. But on the day with a 10K on you and bombs going off and someone smashing you and the rain's coming down, and now you have to do 2 pages, single space, action. And so the only way to know how to do that is to do it.
You'd mentioned Cusack, and I loved him. Like growing up, Cusack was just the
best.
You are essentially like this legendary character actor at this point. I had Alan Tudyk on the show yesterday, and we talked all about the
best. We did 42 together.
He's awesome, great dude.
He had the hardest scene in 42. Oh God, he had the hardest scene, and he crushed it.
But there's a pride. He takes such pride in saying, I am a character actor. And you have become this legendary character actor. Cusack, on the other hand, he was like the leading man for like a solid 5 to 10 year span, where he was like the Brad Pitt of his era. He was just the cool dude getting cast in everything. do you ever look at it and say, man, should I have broken through? Should I have been the leading man? Or is there a pride in being this kind of quote unquote character actor?
I don't know. I never thought about it, to tell you the truth. Like I said, I just didn't want to be a waiter. And so, you know, I've produced my own TV shows now with Stand Against Evil. I'm gonna produce a pilot with Bill Lawrence from Ted Lasso that we're just went out with over the weekend. I don't know. I never gave it any thought. I mean, obviously, if you're doing 6 films a year, knock on wood, there's nothing really to think about except for hitting your mark and saying the lines that are today's lines and trying to add some flavor and contribute to the storytelling.
I always think, looking at Cusack, like how hard that's got to be when you're in the spotlight like that. Like you see so many of these actors, one moment they're all of a sudden John Cusack, or another moment they're Brad Pitt. How hard that's got to be when you're in the spotlight like that. I can't even imagine. I mean, I interview everybody on the planet for the last decade, and fame is a hard fucking thing to handle, man.
Yeah, it buckles some guys. It doesn't. Johnny's too stout. You know, Johnny's about 6'4". He's got Chicago broad shoulders. He can handle that stuff. But your point's well taken. It buckles a bunch of men and women. It just buckles them. Now there's others who crave it, and they manipulate it, and now they kind of source it into monetizing it. And I guess that's the new breed, I guess. But it never ruffled John's feathers.
I asked Tudyk this because he's been a part of so many memorable projects.
You sure have.
Or if you're walking down the street, what are people saying? It's
demographic specific. If it's middle-aged white guys like you, it's always Wall Street and Office Space. If it's African American guys, it's Set It Off and The Rock, and also what's his name? Seagal's movie.
Under Siege?
No, I didn't do Under Siege, dude.
Seagal?
No, I did On Deadly Ground. Me and Michael.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Michael and I were together for 5 months. That was heaven. And then women is always Scrubs. And then little kids are Scrubs. They all watch it. They like the goofy fantasies that little kids. And what else am I missing? That's the demographic breakdown. But it is demographic specific. Oh, and then older white guys and older black guys is Platoon.
Who's the best director of all the great ones you worked on? Who's the one that really blew you away? Is it
Oliver.
Stone?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's not even close.
By the way, a totally under-recognized guy at this point, because when you hear about the greatest director lists, you'll hear Tarantino, you'll hear Scorsese, you'll hear Spielberg. I feel like no one ever says Stone anymore. And it's maybe because he hasn't had that run that he had in the 80s and then into the 90s. But when you talk about greatest directors, that dude should always be on the list. I mean, some of the movies are just mind-bogglingly good.
I couldn't agree more. If you put that body of work up against any other motion picture director, that there's 5 or 6 on there. I don't know how you argue. I mean, Preston Sturges gets all that love for doing 5 great movies. I don't know how you don't put Oliver on there. I mean, I don't care what you think politically. JFK is a stunning, even if it's just for Donald's monologue in the 3rd act and with Kevin's closing arguments. How do you not put that on there? How do you not put Natural Born Killers on there? It reinvented storytelling. Oliver's a motion picture genius. Fact.
You know what I wanted to ask you? I don't know if you've ever listened to Bill Simmons and his Rewatchables podcast, but they dissect the greatest movies. It's a fantastic podcast. But
I'll take that. I'll take that recommendation.
Who is the one actor who you saw, like the Brad Pitt, that was like that women gravitated to most? That if this guy was walked in a room amongst all the great actors you've worked with, and there was a group of women, who's the one winning that battle? Who was the greatest one there?
Well, I did 7 with Brad, David Fincher, and I played the head of the SWAT. Brad, I mean, Brad.
No one like him, right? No one. The charisma up the wazoo and the looks and everything.
I heard Matt Damon said that Brad's heartbeat never gets above 75, and it's true. He's just calm, sexy, cool. Everything's okay. That's not an act.
You're either born with it or you're not, man. You're either born with it or you're not.
I agree.
Or you're an average schmo like you and I. We're just the average guy, or you're Brad Pitt.
It's okay. The world needs a ton of average Joes, man. I'll be that.
Before I let you go, one last movie I want to ask you about with this is Office Space. You touched on it. That was last on my hit list. That movie, can you believe the classic it became? I mean, did you have any idea that thing would become what it became?
No, opposite. Because back when you were growing up and you used to read the Philadelphia Inquirer, and to go see a movie, you would open up the Inquirer, and sometimes there'd be those full-page ads. Do you remember what I'm talking about? Now you punch it up online or something. But you used to open up New York Times or the Philadelphia Inquirer and look at a full-page ad. And some genius at whoever produced Office Space, either Sony or Columbia or somebody, the full-page ad was Milton, the guy with the stapler. It was Milton covered in Post-its. Remember, Post-its, those yellow Post-its? Well, if you cover a man in Post-its, he looks like fucking Big Bird. And so the ad looked like an R-rated Big Bird movie. And so it tanked the tank of all time because nobody wants to see an R-rated Big Bird movie. Nobody gives a shit. And so some genius in fucking publicity at one of those companies decided, I got a way to break through with this movie. We'll cover Milton in fucking Post-its, and that will get people out to the theaters. Well, it did the opposite. And so Office Space died a 2-week run in theaters. I thought it was hilarious because up to that time, all I'd done is serious movies, from Platoon all the way to Johnny Utah, Point Break. Everything was, was Mr. Screaming, meanie, serious guy. And then in this, I get to play all these comedy notes, which I had in my back pocket, but nobody had let me use them yet. And so I was like, yes, this is a fucking outstanding showcase. This will be great. And then the thing fucking tanks. And it was right at the time when VCRs and DVDs and shit were starting to get a foothold for a different way to watch a movie other than going to the movie theater. And so people started to watch Office Space on those two pieces of hardware, and it started to get some traction. And that's the story on Office Space. It shit the bed at the movie theater. And I thought Jen was great in it. I thought the lead was great.
Ron Livingston.
Ronnie was great. Dave Herman was great. Mike Judge wrote this unbelievably subversive script. I thought it was tits, and it fucking shit the bed. And I was so disappointed. And then eventually it started, and it took a while. And it did it. If you look back on it, if you metered it out, it would start to make sense with the rise of VCRs and DVDs, and then people can watch it on their streaming. But this is way prior to streaming, and that's how that thing ever got a foothold. It damn sure didn't in the movie theaters. I went to the cast and crew screening of that, and I was like, yeah, daddy, finally on a winning squad. I've done a bunch of comedies and they'd all suck. And I'm like, there we go. That's what I'm talking about. Not so fast, McGinley, not so fast.
Final question. The main reason I started this show, John, was to talk to successful people from all genres about the mentality and principles that help them find their success. My question for you is, what are the principles you incorporate in your own life to continue to elevate and achieve excellence?
Well, I was lucky enough to have my son Max born 23 years ago, August 30th, and he's still alive and thriving. And Max was born with Down syndrome. And I was introduced into a special needs community that I didn't know existed. And where we function in the Down syndrome and the special needs community is in inclusion and love and elevating people and advocating for people who can't advocate for themselves. And that's my mission. And I spend much more time on that now than I do on anything else, whether it's with the Global Down Syndrome Foundation in Denver or with Best Buddies, a mentoring group out of Miami, or Special Olympics, of which I'm a global ambassador. And what my mission with those groups is to advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves. And that's my priority. And that's what I do now more than anything else. Awesome, man. Final season of Brooklyn Nine-Nine only gets better with John C. McGinley. John, thanks for a fabulous Endless Hustle chat, man. Right on, Arthur. It was great chatting with you.